Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Spring Clean Your Server Closet, Move to the Cloud. Now, in years past, our spring cleanings have looked a little bit different than it does this year, but we're happy to be bringing back a hybrid version of our spring cleaning in the hopes that next year we'll be able to go back to our completely in-person spring cleaning event. For those of you who have not signed up for your date and time for recycling turn-in, please reach out to Christy Massoyan and she will get that scheduled for you ASAP. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Matthew Hagan. Matthew, take it away.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks everyone for attending this. I just want to go over the agenda real quick, a couple things we're going to cover today. I mainly want to talk about why people are moving to the cloud, what cloud services are the best solutions for your organization, and talking about if your environment is cloud ready, as well as how the cloud reduces the risk of downtime and improves performance. Now, it's a big question. Why are people moving to the cloud? There's a lot of different reasons under several different categories. I want to cover some of them with you today. So a big thing is security. Really, this empowers organizations to implement security policies, governance, and compliancy enforcement. It's a big deal. There's a lot of changes in the marketplace. Your company is going to have new needs and requirements that you may not be able to meet on premise. So security is a big thing. It has built-in disaster recovery features and backup features, encryption, a lot of cool features that you might not necessarily get from the on-prem, or at least not as easily. Along with that comes flexibility. What's really cool with that is you have things like burstable instances, so you can put an application out in the cloud and you could have it scale up, scale down, and really meet your business needs. It's ideal for growing businesses and fluctuating needs. You know, you may not know what you need 5 years from now, and something like any kind of cloud service is going to help you do that. It's really going to help you map it out and be able to flex and grow with your company. It's also smart. There's a lot of self-learning and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And you know, you ask, what can artificial intelligence and machine learning really do? So machine learning it's monitoring the machines that are running, it's monitoring the applications that are running, and it's right-sizing those based on instant usage. So if you use something more, it's going to scale it up. If you use something less, it's going to scale it down. And you may ask why that's important. Well, it cuts wasteful spending. So instead of paying for over-provisioned resources, you can right-size it the first time and automatically adjust to make sure you're not spending too much. And the artificial intelligence, it helps provide personalized experience and recommendations to customers to increase loyalty. You could have a front-end web application with artificial intelligence in it that says, you know, this customer is browsing this, they may be interested in that. It really helps give that personal touch and feel. It can also automate processes. It may even eliminate the need for interaction. You know, your company may have some kind of process or procedure where a certain employee needs to do these 20 things in the steps in a row, and a lot of that can be changed with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It can make that so, you know, the interaction may not even be required anymore. Another neat thing is predictive failures. So it's constantly running, it's constantly learning from resources that you're running, and it'll tell you trends and patterns and say, hey, you know, we're looking at this, and I think we may have an issue with this point in time and this feature, and it tells you about those errors in advance, which is really cool. And it also forecasts your trends. So if it sees an upward trend where you're starting to use more and more resources, it forecasts that and helps you plan, you know, budgetary and otherwise for your company. Working anywhere, that's been a huge one, especially in this last year with COVID and everything. And cloud adoption has allowed us to more easily work from home. You know, there's a lot of companies out there that went entirely in the office to entirely remote almost overnight, and there's a lot of things cloud offerings can do to help with that. One of the biggest ones is called Windows Virtual Desktop. For anyone on here that's familiar with remote desktop services, it's pretty similar, but instead of joining a joint remote desktop server, you get your own specialized instance of either Windows 10 or you could actually do a server operating system as well. But everyone gets their own unique Windows virtual desktop based off an image. It really makes that work anywhere model even easier. Something a lot of people don't think of with this work anywhere mindset is lowering the cost of end user hardware. So if I'm an end user and I need, to do some kind of processes and different things that require a little more demand of my local machine, you have to buy a more powerful computer. But with this work from anywhere mindset, all my processing and everything I'm doing is going to be done on that virtual environment. So your cost of the local machines could actually go down as well because those performance needs aren't as high. When we talk about why people are moving to the cloud, it's scalability is a huge one. When you're on-prem, you're kind of forced to use whatever hardware you have. If you need new hardware, you have to plan for it and budget for it. But any kind of cloud offering is very scalable. It quickly modifies instances, the sizings and the parameters. And this can actually accelerate organizational growth, simplify adding new members or entire acquisitions. If everything is already in the cloud, adding additional pieces to the cloud becomes that much easier. Speed is a huge contribution to this. As I kind of mentioned, you're not waiting on hardware components or installation anymore. There's no backlog or anything to build a new virtual machine, a new appliance, a new resource. It's there, it's on demand, and it's continuously improving itself. Simplicity. You may not think simplicity when we think cloud, but once you're in there and you have the correct management pieces and the right foundation in place, it really does become simple. It also eliminates your end of life concerns. A lot of hardware begins to age. A typical life cycle is going to be 3 to 5 years, and we don't have to worry about that end of life anymore or the end of support. If everything's in the cloud, then those become a thing of the past. It surprisingly enough also makes budgeting for IT easier. With a lot of that smart learning and the logs and analytics that cloud offerings have, it does those forecasts and it tells you, you're starting to increase in this, you're going down in this, and it can help predict what those costs are going to be and actually makes budgeting easier. Another thing is consolidating your data centers. So, if you're co-located at data centers or you have in-house data centers, then you can offload that hardware responsibility to a cloud vendor rather than yourself. Really simplifies a lot of the steps. And the last reason why a lot of people are moving to the cloud, or at least the one I'm going to mention, is the service. There's a big importance of cloud service providers like Red Level. We're required to have certified technicians on staff to make sure we get you the right answer as quickly as possible. So from there, we've kind of talked about everything there. And now I want to go through and say what cloud services are the best solution for your organization. So for those that may not know or haven't talked with us more deeply, Azure is Red Level's primary cloud partner. That's our cloud partners of choice. It doesn't mean it's the only cloud partner we go with, but it is our first choice. So the features I'm going to go over on here are pretty tailored to Azure specific features. Let's go over them here. So if you're interested in identity and access management, there's a couple different things. Azure Active Directory is great. It's a centralized management of all of your users. It can simplify things instead of having to worry about replication between domain controllers or any on-prem issues. It's just a single repository. Multi-factor authentication is amazing, and I'm sure most of you on this call or presentation are already using it to some extent. So multi-factor authentication is basically requiring an additional authentication method to the traditional username and password. So if I go to log in addition to my normal username and password, it may also require things like it might text me a code or email me a code, even might give me a phone call to confirm. There's also a lot of things out there that run software algorithms on your phone to where it's going to show basically a PIN that you have to enter along with your username and password, and that's constantly changing, and that helps reduce attacks dramatically and the likelihood that you're going to get that account compromised. There's also single sign-on. So this kind of goes why multi-factor authentication is so important. So single sign-on is a great thing. It allows you to access your apps from anywhere using a single login. And you can actually use that same identity internally and externally to collaborate. This is what I do with Red Level. Any clients that I communicate with, I use my same ID and we can share resources, and it's isolated between the two. It's very helpful. On the Microsoft 365 side of things for identity and access management, there's a couple cool features in here as well. So Windows Hello, that's one that allows you to more easily access your Windows 10 devices. And that uses either a PIN, facial recognition, or fingerprints. So think what your smartphone does, but imagine it on a Windows 10 device. Now, Credential Guard is actually a really cool feature. It's essentially a security feature that helps protect your credentials in a few different ways. So it's something that runs locally, and it only allows access to trusted or privileged applications. That's one layer of security. And now normally your credentials, they're normally stored within the memory on the local machine under a local security authority. What Credential Guard does is it actually runs a virtual and isolated local security authority. So what that means is your security authority is running in an isolated environment that your normal operating system actually can't access. So even, in the event of malware intrusion affecting your machine, they likely cannot access that still. Let's move over to threat protection, and we'll first talk about Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center, it's a centralized location to manage, assess, and visualize the security state of your resources in Azure. So it's really an all-inclusive management portal. You can assess the security state of Azure workloads, and this includes servers, storage, SQL, networks, and applications. And let's move on to the Defender here, the advanced protection. So you remember the artificial intelligence and machine learning I mentioned earlier? Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection utilizes both of these for preventative and post-detection protection. It's real-time threat protection against vulnerability management. It's automatic investigation and remediation. Advanced threat protection can monitor it can monitor your alerts and actually reduce the number of false positives as well. So I'm sure anyone that's on an IT team or has been on an IT team understands the obnoxious amount of false positives you can get sometime. And it has a really cool feature to help reduce that noise. If, let's say, you get notifications for successful updates of the client, we don't necessarily care about that. And there's a couple cool features in there that'll help you just stay focused on the threats that actually require intervention. Along with that, there's actually a secure score that you can get from the security center. And what's cool about that is it rates your security for your specific environment on resources. And in addition to rating it, it also provides recommendations for remediation. Down on the 365 side of things, this protection is more based around email, but it's still Azure function. So it does typical email activities like prevent and detect spam, phishing attempts, malware, bulk email, spoofing, things like that. There are some other features like safe attachments and safe links. It's basically something that can go through and scan your attachments or scan links that come in email to verify that they're going to be safe for end user use. There's also Defender for Office 365 workloads. So that's it's Defender for the built-in applications like SharePoint Online, Teams, OneDrive for Business. There's Microsoft Cloud App Security that acts kind of like a gatekeeper between users and resources. MS Cloud App Security, it really provides visibility to detect cloud services. It assigns the risk rankings, and it also identifies who all have access. So it really keeps the resources in your environment, in your new cloud environment, under control, so you can really make sure they're secure and only those who need access have it. It helps identify and control sensitive information, provides users with entity behavior analysis. Oh my goodness. So what that does is based on user behavior, it can actually rank users, whether they're low, medium, or high threat. If they're clicking all kind of links and emails and not really caring too much, then they're likely going to be flagged as a high threat. And there's some things that you can have it do with that. Let's move over to the network security here. Now, I'm only going to focus on Azure for this. And the first one on here is microsegmentation. Anyone who's been in the IT community knows that segmentation is important to make sure only things that need to talk to each other, and Azure kind of takes it the next step forward into micro-segmentation. So it really does follow the Microsoft zero trust model. It's basically saying resources don't have access to anything unless they need it. It segments each resource you deploy in Azure with specific rules and guidelines for communication to each other. The application gateway is a great feature. It allows traffic load balancing to specific resources, and it can be based upon request and sub URL. So with the application gateway, if you're running a front-end web server and you want, the subdirectory of /images to go to one resource, you can do that, and then make it so /video goes to a second resource. You can do that as well. The Azure Firewall is an amazing security tool. It's a managed cloud-based network security service. Since it's all hosted within Azure, it has built-in HA, meaning you don't have to spend the upfront cost of having 2 firewalls with HA and redundant internet connections and that sort of thing, at least for this infrastructure. It's fully integrated with the Azure Monitor for logging analytics. We'll go over that in just a little bit under security management. So DDoS protection, pretty cool. There's 2 plans, more or less. There's a basic protection and then there's the standard protection. So the basic protection is just normal DDoS protection, helps prevent and stop them, and that's actually included at no cost. Then there is the DDoS protection standard. So the standard offers a couple additional features that the basic doesn't. One of them, pretty cool, is the DDoS Rapid Response Support Team. So they actually have a dedicated team, and if you have the standard protection, then this dedicated team will work with you in the event of a DDoS attack. And it also offers cost protection. So if you receive data transfer and application scale out service credit for resource costs incurred as a result of DDoS. So if there's additional charges with that standard plan due to a DDoS attack, you'll actually get credit for those resources, which is really cool. That they're not going to charge you for someone trying to bring your network down. There's the virtual WAN as well. So virtual WAN, it's providing a single operational interface for networking, security, and routing. Along with that, you have a traditional site-to-site VPN, and then it also offers ExpressRoute. So ExpressRoute is a connection that lets you connect your on-premise environment to Azure over a private connection, rather over your internet. We'll move over to the data and information protection. So encryption. Everything's about encryption now. A lot of compliances require it. So what Azure offers is disk encryption. They can do encryption of data at rest. They can protect Windows and Linux virtual machines, and they utilize Azure Disk Encryption, which is BitLocker. What's neat about doing it in Azure is the encryption keys and the secrets are safeguarded in your Azure Key Vault subscription. So moving on to Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault is a place to store and protect tokens, passwords, certificates, API keys, and encryption keys. It's a centralized repository. It's simplified administration, which is great. It's all in a single pane of glass. Securely stores requiring proper authorization. So here's where we loop back to the identity and access management. We need to make sure that the multi-factor authentication and the role-based access control, we need to make sure those security policies are in place to make sure only people that need and should have access to that key vault have it. It's also monitored, so they monitor access and use. So if Matt Hagen is in there, I don't know, deleting keys that we need, well, at least we'll know we did it. Hopefully there's some other security rules where I can't delete it. That's why it's always important to have that good foundation. Confidential computing. This is actually what I'm personally excited about. So everyone knows about encryption of data at rest and encryption of data in motion, but confidential computing is encryption of data being processed. So it allows the isolation of sensitive data while being processed in the cloud. And it's actually secured at the hardware level and forces the execution of only authorized code. It's a really cool service. It's a lot more efficient to do it in a cloud-based setting, so you don't have that local hardware cost to do that. And again, it's something I'm personally very excited for. Now, on the Microsoft 365 side of things, we have the Azure Information Protection. So what that is a cloud-based solution. It enables discovery, classification, and protection of documents and emails based upon labels that are applied to them. Along with that, we also have data loss prevention. This is something I'm happy for. We use it all the time. Essentially, it's going to be a scan of your email. So it takes a look at your outgoing emails and it looks at that for sensitive information. So if you're sending an email with sensitive information, let's say like credit card number, social security number, maybe HIPAA information, it can do certain things with that. So if I send an email and I put my credit card number out there and I just send it to somebody, don't ask why I do that. Hopefully I won't. We can either have it log that to say, okay, he sent that with, sensitive information. We could have it display a warning on my screen letting me know that I'm doing it. Or we can actually block that email entirely. In today's age, it's getting more and more important to make sure that our data is secure. And this is one of the few options out there that can protect us from accidentals. We don't want end users sending things they shouldn't. Lastly, on the service offerings here, we're going to go over to the security management. So within Azure, there's Security Center. We kind of covered what that does under threat protection. The Azure Log Analytics. So it's a lot better than it sounds. Traditionally, if you have to look through logs, especially on Windows operating systems, there's a lot of things you have to dig through to try and get what you actually need. But the Azure Log Analytics is useful. It's a tool to edit and run the log queries from data collected within Azure Monitor Logs, and you actually interactively analyze the results. If anyone's interested in seeing that more depth, I do recommend you reach out to us. That's something we can help you with, but there's a lot of very good and useful information you can get from Azure Log Analytics. We'll move down to the 365 side here. We've talked about the Secure Score. Now the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center, it's just another tool to help you with remediation. So it's a measurement of the organization's security posture based upon your compliancy, and it provides recommendations based upon the score and the environment. So, it makes me happy to see the things that they recommend and score you on isn't just a number. Along with the number, they give you very detailed information on what they suggest you change as well and how to remediate it. This is not all of the cloud service offerings out there. These are just the ones that I want to mention on this particular webinar. There's other cloud providers other than Azure. There's other offerings from those other providers, and even Azure has other offerings aside from what you see on here. But these are some good ones to focus on. I just quickly wanted to throw this out there. Everything you see on the screen, these are all red level partners. These are people that we work with day in, day out. And all of these partners, they see the value in the cloud and where it's going and everything. And all of these partners have partnered with different public cloud providers and offering tailored solutions specific for those environments. It's pretty cool. I mean, even if you go to the Azure, marketplace right now, you'll find all these vendors in there with their offerings. Now this is a big one, so hopefully you guys can withstand me talking for a little while yet. But is your environment cloud ready? So as I mentioned, Azure's Red Level's primary cloud partner. So with that being said, we've adopted a lot from the Microsoft Cloud's adoption framework. But I do want to say there's no single cloud adoption path that works for every organization, but the main implementation stages are similar for all organizations and industries. It really comes to defining your strategy, making a plan, readying your organization, adopting to the cloud, and then governing and managing your digital estate. I'm really only going to be speaking briefly on the first three stages because that's really where you need to be cloud ready. We're going to look at defining that strategy, and honestly, a really important thing is understanding the motivations. We're asked all the time, why are we moving to the cloud? That's a common question for organizations, and without knowing the organization's motives, it's really unlikely that we're going to get the desired outcome. So it's super important. Many migrations are driven by a lot of different motivations, and it's likely that more than one apply. Most motivations fall into three different categories. It's either going to be a critical business event, a migration, or maybe an innovation. So critical business events, that's going to be a data center exit. You have to get out of a data center. Maybe there's a merger or acquisition. Maybe you need to reduce your capital expense. Maybe your business critical technology is either end of life or end of support to where you're forced to make that move quicker. There's a possibility that it's a change in compliance needs. A lot of those are hard to wrap your head around and budget for on premise, especially if it's taken up all of a sudden. There's also migration motivations. So there's usually a cost savings when you migrate to a cloud. There's definitely an increase in business agility. That could be another motivation. Maybe you're preparing for new technology. Maybe you're scaling to meet market and geographical demands. That's a great reason to migrate. It's very hard to get a global outreach from your on-prem infrastructure. There's also some innovation motives. Maybe you're trying to build out new technology capabilities or transform your products and services. It's also important to identify business outcomes that are concise, defined with observable results, change in business performance supported by a specified measure. So once we know those motives, we also want to find business outcomes, because rather than the motive of just wanting to do it, we want an actual measurable business outcome from this change. We don't want to just change for no reason. And there's a couple different reasons, right? You could possibly do it for fiscal outcomes, lower the cost, increase your profits. Agility outcomes, we want to show the organization's flexibility, the ability, being able to scale up and out. Maybe you have customer engagement outcomes. You want to increase ability to involve customers. Maybe you have performance outcomes. Maybe you're on old, outdated hardware, and you want to move and have the business outcome of having higher performance. Now, these are just some examples, and your business outcome should fit the unique needs of your organization. So since we have our motives and we have the business outcomes that we want, we need to justify it and prioritize the project. That involves evaluating our financial considerations and technical considerations. The financial considerations, there's a lot of change when you go to a cloud platform, and it's no short of finances being changed as well. And the biggest change is really you kind of go from that CapEx cost of paying for your infrastructure upfront, having a locally and not really any OpEx aside from your staffing, maybe support agreements, that sort of thing, to entirely OpEx. Everything in most cloud platforms is pay as you go. So it means you're only paying for the resources as you use them, when you use them, nothing more. And then you have to look at technical capabilities. So when we do that, it's time to review the technical flexibility, the efficiencies, and the capabilities that may not be possible with an on-prem IT network. So that we're not focused on so much mapping your applications quite yet, but just kind of understanding what you can do in the cloud to help with that mapping later in the planning stage. There's a lot of scalability, so you can scale based on usage, utilization, demand, availability. It's a lot less cost to build an HA or DR environment in a cloud platform versus on-premise. Think of all the security and compliance options. Capacity optimization is a great one, because some of your platforms and services, maybe they don't need the fastest disk. So, as you're thinking about this, great, you can have some more cost savings based on that information as well. So cloud adoption, in the planning phase here, cloud adoption plans convert the goals of your strategy into an actionable plan. So we have our strategy now. Now we need to make an actionable plan. Your plan can be used to guide technical efforts and align them with your organization's strategy. Make sure everyone's on the same page. A big step in that is looking at your digital estate. So you really need to inventory and rationalize your IT assets. That includes your applications, the software, the hardware, the operating systems, performance metrics. And you have to ask yourself, is that asset being used today? Is it optimized and sized properly? What dependencies exist, if any, and keep in mind the technical considerations during this phase. So, just in this strategy phase, we kind of looked at what capabilities there are. Now that we're looking at our estate, let's kind of think of how things would map. After that, we're really going to want to get the initial organizational alignment. So it's essentially establishing a plan for initial alignment to support the adoption plan. So you're creating a team with appropriate members and assignments. It is really important that people within the organization are on board. They need to understand and support this adoption to the cloud if you want to be successful. Um, at a minimum, it's recommended that people are assigned and accountable for both the cloud adoption and the cloud governance. So we're not going to cover cloud governance today, but it is part of the overlying framework. You have to specify who's responsible for each technical task, find out who's accountable for delivery and responsible for the governance. There's a lot of things in the organizational alignment to make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. As part of this planning phase, we need to make a skill readiness plan, and it's a little involved. It consists of capturing concerns and identifying gaps. We need to capture the concerns. We need to know what type of concern people have. The impact if the concern is not addressed is always important, and the area equipped to address the concern. We also have to identify the gaps. So we need to establish responsibilities that come with the migration. We need to identify areas that align with each responsibility. And we also have to identify required skills to support each responsibility. There's likely going to be gaps, in your internal team to where people will need to be trained to understand these changes. And you also have to identify the roles that will execute these skills. It may not be a role that you have in your company today, but it's something that is recommended. Lastly, from all of that, we're going to make the cloud adoption plan. So the cloud adoption plan, that's developing the plan to manage the changes across your digital estate, skills, and organization. So this is the overall plan that's going to help transition and monitor all these changes. You have to go through, make sure that you've done all the prerequisites, confirm that all the prerequisites you have for the plan have taken place. You have to define and prioritize the initial workloads, align assets to the workloads. You need to determine which assets are required for prioritized workloads. You have to go back and kind of review those rationalized decisions. So, review the decisions that have been made so far, plan for the migration or innovation. So when we talk migration to the cloud, there's really a couple different options. You can migrate, which is either a lift and shift or moving to similar technologies, or you can go the innovation route, which is kind of rebuilding your applications in a new fashion where it's cloud native. And part of that cloud adoption plan, you also need to establish timelines. It's really important in any type of project that rough timelines are gathered and set. Again, this is tailored to the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, but these primary stages are similar for other cloud providers. Lastly, in these three stages is the readiness stage. So Azure Readiness Guide, it's a review of the setup guides. You should become familiar with the tools and approaches required for landing zones. We'll create the first landing zone. So a landing zone, think of this as kind of the foundation for your cloud infrastructure. Landing zone, it's a set of codes and resources to help ensure your new infrastructure is scalable, make sure it's modular, and also to make sure it's going to meet your requirements going forward. Again, it's really the foundation for your house in the cloud world. And we always want to make sure the most appropriate landing zone option is selected for your specific environment. After you get that first landing zone, then we talk about expanding. So once your initial landing zone has been deployed, it should be revisited to meet any additional enterprise requirements. There's some basic considerations. You want to refine your hosting, the fundamentals, or other fundamental elements. There's the operations expanse. Maybe you want to exchange management configurations for more performance, reliability, or operational excellence. Governance expansions. Governance is a real important thing to make sure all your data is the way it should be. Maybe you want to add governance configurations to improve the costs, the reliability, security, and consistency. Consistency is very important in the cloud. Another reason might be security expansions. Maybe you need to add some additional security configurations to improve the protection of sensitive data. It's all things to consider after you get that first landing zone. The last thing we want to look at in this plan for migrating to the cloud is best practice validation. There are a lot of components to any cloud infrastructure, and it's important that we ensure these pieces are all adhering to best practices for that cloud vendor and our specific industry. Fundamentals, we want to review and ensure base cloud components are deployed in a controllable and scalable way. The networking portions, we want to ensure the chosen topologies are the best choice and that it's in a secure place. Identity and access control, like we mentioned, that's a big one. We don't want that to be in the way. That's not the point, but we do want to improve the security, the management, and the efficiency of your workloads. And these are just some of the areas that should be reviewed. One other one I want to mention is really cost management too. So with the pay-as-you-go pricing model, we want to ensure that your money is spent wisely and efficiently, and it's all trackable. You can plan accordingly for future growth, and you can also get alerts on spending, which is great. Once all of this has been established and reviewed, you are cloud ready. And I know this is a lot. I know it's pretty overbearing. There are assessments in addition to this. So there's assessments that exist out there, and they definitely help plan these migrations or help perform them as well. So Azure offers quite a few. There's one called the Cloud Journey Tracker that helps identify cloud adoption paths. So we go back to one of the earlier stages. There's the Cloud Adoption Framework Governance tool. So that's going to identify the gaps in your organization against the framework model. The Azure Well Architect Review. This examines your workloads through aspect of cost, security, and performance. This is one I use all the time. It's the actual Azure migration tool. It's used for the actual migration to Azure, but it can be used as an assessment tool as well. It runs in your environment and it starts the preparation work for moving to Azure, but it helps right size your virtual machines to make sure you're not going to over provision them. There's also partner companies. So there's partner companies like Red Level. We often have our own assessments to help understand cloud adoption. All right, for everyone still awake, let's talk about the cloud and how to reduce the risk of downtime and improve performance. I know I'm hitting a lot of these subjects, but let's talk about security. Security, really, it's protecting your data at all times. The cloud offers controlled access, strong perimeters, and surveillance systems to ensure the safety of your data. We're talking about reliability. It's important to select a cloud service provider that has employed redundant solutions to ensure high HA. You want to make sure that it's got automatic failover, redundant servers, backups, security systems, power. It's going to do nothing but increase the SLAs, and that's a huge one for improving down or lowering the risk of downtime. Mobility, this is one that reduces downtime and increases performance all in one. You work from anywhere at any time. By moving these resources off premise and into your cloud, you enable your staff the ability to not be confined by location anymore. So if your headquarters loses power, if the ISP goes out, it's almost irrelevant. Recovery speed is a huge one. We touched on backups and disaster recovery, and a lot of cloud providers out there have those features natively built into the cloud. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper than trying to implement new hardware and new solutions entirely on your own. The last piece on here is really it's fast, it's flexible environment. So cloud providers have many options to scale up or scale out, even scale down. The ability to go serverless in some clouds, such as Azure, to help modernize your applications, but also bring cost savings to you. Provisioning times are down to minutes, not days or weeks. You don't have to work on hardware anymore. So since we've talked about all those topics and where everything lies and all the options for infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, I do want to touch base on the shared responsibility model. So when customers leverage their on-premise IT estate, they have complete responsibility to protect the data. It's 100% the customer's responsibility at that point to protect the data, implement the controls, everything. But in the graph, as you see, as they move towards more cloud services, it lessens and lessens your burden and your responsibility. For example, if you use something, software as a service like Microsoft 365 or Office 365, Microsoft helps you take care of the majority of the controls, including physical infrastructure and networking. That way customers don't need to spend resources building their own data center or setting up network controls. With all of that being said, I did want to touch briefly and lastly on the total cost of ownership, because a lot of this can potentially save you money. You're on premise, there's a lot of things that you have to buy and pay for upfront, and only a small margin of it is actually software. And there's also a lot of ongoing costs that you may or may not be aware of. We go to cloud computing and it's almost entirely subscription based. And here's kind of the savings areas we typically see. So the biggest one is going to be capital expense. You don't have to buy the on-premise hardware and software. It's a significant upfront savings. The operation expense, so hardware and software support, network infrastructure support, storage warranties, even the server room and your power and facilities. Those are all things that you don't have to worry about anymore. We're also saving money in indirect costs. So being that you're moving to a cloud, your potential for downtime is lessened compared to on-premise. And even more so if you configure HA and disaster recovery abilities. But that's another additional saving by just avoiding those downtimes. A couple additional saving areas I'll touch on here. The environmental optimizations. So re-architecting some applications to go serverless, migrating away from the typical file server to utilize SharePoint, OneDrive solutions, database as a service, and more. A lot of those are going to be a lot cheaper than having a full-on server. And lastly here, automation and orchestration. So you can have it automatically power down systems when you're not using them. If your company's not working on the weekend, they can be powered down. And since it's pay as you go, you then don't pay for that weekend time. And going back to the burstable instances, you can have those scale up or scale down as well. And in some cases, you can even automate entire jobs or functions. So, and your resources can be freed up to do and focus on other things. And with that, I want to open it up to some questions if you guys have any. I really appreciate you hanging in there, listening to me talk. And, if you have any questions, you feel free to email us there and give us a call.
Absolutely. So we did have a couple of questions come in through the Q&A panel. For anybody else that might have a question, feel free to use that panel and we would be more than happy to answer your questions. But first up, what does a typical company still have on premise if everything is moved to the cloud?
Gotcha. So for organizations that have an HQ or branch offices, it's really critical to ensure your network infrastructure is ready to support the cloud. You really want to make sure that you have redundancy within those locations. That's going to be key. You're going to have redundant internet providers. You're going to want to have redundant firewall, redundant networking, because everything at that point is going to be cloud-based. So you really want to make sure that you have that connection when you need it.
All right.
Hopefully that answered their question.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll put in for some additional clarification if they need to. Next question. The shared responsibility model. Is there any way to reduce a company's risk or footprint even more?
Let me go back to that for a second here. So this guy right here, this shared responsibility model. Yeah, I mean, as you can see on-prem, all the responsibility is on you. A great thing you can do, I mean, absolutely, right? That's what Red Level does. We're a managed service provider, so we can take a look at cloud offerings, your on-premise. We're really good for companies that maybe have limited IT staff or limited experience on how to take full advantage of these features and benefits. But yeah, absolutely, give us a call, and we can definitely help shift some of those responsibilities.
Perfect. Let's see. Got another one. I have remote desktop now. What can I do to bring that into Azure? Can I take advantage of WVD?
I am glad somebody asked that, because absolutely. We do it all the time. So WVD is more than just the virtual Windows 10 desktops. With WVD, you can actually put an agent on existing remote desktop hosts, and then they can use WV technology to get into those existing remote desktop servers. It's pretty cool because it could actually save you some money as well. Typically, you need a connection broker and a gateway for traditional remote desktop servers, but with WVD, Azure takes care of those services. So yeah, absolutely, we could move the current remote desktop server, install a WVD agent, and it works very well actually.
Awesome. That is all of the questions that I have right now. Again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to give us a call or send us an email. We would be more than happy to help you with those questions. And I would like to thank Matt for our presentation today and look forward to seeing you at our technology recycling program. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.